Okay, 10:01, we're going to get started here. If people come in, they come in. We're going to start. So just to show you know how the roadmap's going to go this month. So in my class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 weeks with Elijah. Then we'll have a week off because of the voters meeting and budget approval meeting. And then 2 weeks of Elisha, if that makes sense. That's how I'm going to end this with the two big kind of major prophets par excellence in the Old Testament. So we're going to start with Elijah and get through First Kings 17 today. There's an outline that was on my piano if you saw that. And it's just basically some notes from the Lutheran Study Bible, the ESV Study Bible, and on the other side, it's a quote from the Illustrated Backgrounds Bible Commentary about how unique Elijah actually is. So let's look at Elijah here a little bit. So I'm going to introduce him. Now, I don't have, if you, I've got these on the screen. I didn't give you extra handouts, but just to kind of give you a little brief introduction. If those of you who haven't been in my class or kind of love to see this chronologically, those are his rough dates. Of course, we don't have his exact birth certificate, right, or death certificate. And in this case, there is no death certificate because he's translated into heaven. But 900 or so BC to 849 or so BC. Now, the 849, the reason that date is so specific is we can do some math in terms of how long Ahab is reigning and stuff like that. We can do some math. So we can get a pretty exact date in terms of when he is translated into heaven or assumed into heaven or ascends, whatever word you want to use there. His name means my God is Yahweh, which is very, very important when everybody else around him seemingly is worshiping Baal and Ashtaroth and all these other false gods. When your name itself says that my God is Yahweh, there's some symbolism there in the Old Testament. Those names mean something. He's mostly ministering in the northern kingdom of Israel and also the surrounding territories on the fringe. I'll give you a map later on here on the screen, but northern Israel and then again the surrounding territories. His themes, opposing idolatry, faithfulness to Yahweh, and then, of course, we see law and gospel in Elijah very, very clearly. You'll see this as we go. There's a definite law edge to this in the sense that idolatry and paganism can lead to literal death in some cases, or in other cases, though, God is helping even the Gentiles. For example, in the passage today, the Syrophoenician woman, right? That should be a hint to you by way of the ministry of Christ. But he's going to go to Sidon, which is on the coast. It's not even a town in the people of Israel. And he saves a widow and her son. And so there's law and gospel in Elijah. And then we have some typology. We have Moses and Joshua in the same way that we're going to get Elijah and Elisha. This typological theme is very, very clear in the Old Testament. And so I will remind you over and over and again, this idea of typology, that we have these types in the Old Testament, and sometimes they repeat themselves, these patterns, and then in the New Testament, they have their ultimate fulfillment. So Elijah is fulfilled in John the Baptist, ultimately, the spirit of Elijah. However, if you go back far enough, you have this Moses figure who kind of is the mouthpiece for God, and then he has a successor in Joshua who leads the people through, right, in conquest of Canaan. In the same way, we're going to have Elijah and his successor, Elisha, who has a double portion of his spirit. So this typological theme, just you can think that way in terms of the macro view or the high view of Scripture, the greater story that's going on. And of course, if that's the case, we would say Elisha is kind of a Christ type. And we can look at that at the end of the month when we get to Elisha. It becomes very clear why we say that. There's some stuff in Elisha's life that points to the ministry of Christ very, very directly. Where Elijah, with the clothes that he wears, the fact that he's out in the desert, there's some hints there that he's more like John the Baptist. Okay, so anyways, just showing you that from a macro view. Some other things about Elijah. Your main text, we'll see 1 Kings 17, but this narrative goes all the way to 2 Kings 2. There's a little interruption when Ahab goes to war with Ben-Hadad, which is one of the cool names in the Old Testament, Ben-Hadad. But he goes, I never have forgotten that name since I was a kid. But it starts in 1 Kings 17 with the call of Elijah, and then it ends with his assumption into heaven in 2 Kings 2 in a fiery chariot. In the New Testament, he's mentioned numerous times. He's mentioned in Luke. He's present at the Transfiguration along with Moses, representing the prophets. He's mentioned in Matthew and in James and in Romans and in Hebrews. So he is definitely a major, major figure also in the New Testament. I can let you look those passages up. If we have time next week, I'll try to bring up a couple of these passages so you can see how the New Testament interprets his ministry. But it should show you that he's mentioned not only by Christ, but by Paul, James, and of course the author to Hebrews. So again, very, very major figure in both the Old and in the New Testaments. Some other figures in his ministry and in his story. There's, of course, King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, who is so notorious that being a Jezebel enters the popular parlance of somebody who's a traitorous and femme fatale, right? To call somebody a Jezebel. Elisha, of course, what was that? Yeah, that's like the only thing she was. Elisha, we got Obadiah, who is a faithful believer that's in the court of Ahab. We have the prophets of Baal and Asherah. We have Naboth. This is the vineyard, the famous vineyard when we have pouting Ahab, okay? Ben-Hadad is the king of Syria, Ahaziah, and there's other believers that are mentioned as well and other prophets. So there's a lot of characters in this story. This is one of those dramatic accounts in the Bible. If anybody ever asked me when I have a high school student say, Mr. Hayes, the Bible's boring, I say read 1 Kings 17 through like 2 Kings 5, because that's the beginning of Elisha's ministry, and then come back to me. And you tell me if this is boring. And they're like, okay, usually they come back, and every time I say that, they'll say, okay, no, you're right. This is like high drama. And I was like, you're right. Okay, this is not boring. He's also commemorated on our church calendar. I don't know if you know this, but we don't do this a lot here at Grace Lutheran because we only have about 15 to 20% cradle Lutherans. So we're just trying to get Jesus right, and we're trying to get doctrine right. So we often don't do these commemorations or saints days, but we do have a church calendar. And Elijah, also called Elias in Latin, but Elijah is commemorated on July 20th. Along with the Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and the Anglican traditions. We have these commemorations. I often tell my high school students that we view these as kind of like President's Day. So we honor, in our case, on President's Day, it's Washington and Lincoln, right? And so we honor them and maybe tell stories like the cherry tree, or, we talk about Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, or Washington and how he gives up his power after 2 terms when he could have been king. And we tell these stories about the virtues of Lincoln and Washington. Well, in the same way in the church, we use Elijah as this prophet par excellence, as, a life well lived. Not perfect, still needs a savior, still has his flaws, and we see that in the text, but somebody worth emulating, kind of a hero of the faith. And it's okay to have those heroes. And so we commemorate. We don't pray to them, but we have these commemorations. Lord, as you've raised up people like Elijah in the past, may it be that we follow that example. And also may it be, Lord, that you raise up other Elijahs, right? In the history of your church. So we use this as an example, a commemoration. All right. So in iconography, he's portrayed this way on the left. This is Eastern Orthodox iconography. Obviously, the one on the left on your screen is in English, and he's in the desert, in the valley there. And you can see in the upper left corner there, I can use my mouse here, the raven bringing him food. That we'll see here in just a second in our text as he contemplates in the desert. And you can see he's wearing the rough clothing there. And then on the right, again, in the rough clothing, it says Elias there in Greek lettering, but there's the prophet Elijah. And then this is a couple of depictions in Eastern Orthodoxy of his Assumption, or what's in Greek is called the Anabasis. So it's hard to see there, but that second line right there, that's Anabasis. And over here, it keeps going. That's Anabasis. That means his translation or elevation might be the direct Greek word for that. And so you could see the chariots of fire. That's Elisha clinging to him. See that? And then he's using Elijah's cloak to cross the river again. So the Elisha is in the icon. It's kind of cool. They keep the Bible story going. And that's him down here as well. And he says, my father, right? When he says that when Elijah's taken away, that's him here also outside. And that's, again, the Jordan River. So there's kind of this iconography that's attached to Elijah. So it's cool to see this visually as visual people. But also just when you surround yourself with this sort of artwork, when you have kids and you're like, Dad, what's that story? Well, this is the story of Elijah. Let me tell you about this. Why is this here? And you can tell the story. It's the gospel in painting in this case. This is actually from a Lutheran artist. This is called The Sacrifice of Elijah. This is Lucas Cranach the Younger. You can see this in the 1550s. You can recognize that kind of Northern Renaissance type style here. And sometimes if you actually get really into the weeds, you can identify some of the people. Like right here, that's the artist. That's Lucas Cranach himself in his self-portrait. And so you can start to identify some folks here. But this is Elijah's sacrifice. The priests of Baal are here. Their sacrifice is not lit. Okay, but the sacrifice of Elijah, who's represented right here looking to heaven, is lit. And you see the fire of God coming from heaven as things go. And notice all the spears in the background. That's ominous because, of course, the priests of Baal and Asherah are going to be executed. as false prophets according to Old Testament law. So you could see that there. And then this is another take. This is a little bit more modern take. This is, again, the ascension of Elijah. We have Elisha down here holding a staff, and he has Elijah's cloak already, and Elijah's being taken into heaven. That's what I used as the background for my slide here as well. And then this is later on in the 1700s, Elijah being taken up again. He looks a little older there. As iconography develops, prophets tend to have big old beards to show them as having dignity, or to show them as having authority. They almost look kind of godlike is the idea. And so he's being taken into heaven. So there's lots of beautiful, and I mean beautiful, high-end, best of Western civilization sort of thing, art when it comes to the story of Elijah. There's a, yeah, I know. Although if you're a prophet of God, who knows? Moses probably looked pretty white after a while too, right? So you never know. Right, but Elisha in particular, the one where it's more of an anachronism, I would think, is Elisha here looks older than he probably was. Elisha was probably only in his 30s or so. But if you go to the other iconography, like this one, Elisha, especially this one, he does look younger. If you look at him here, or even here, actually, they don't have him here. See, he's got more of a brown beard, right? Notice, by the way, he has bald hair. We'll come to that in a few weeks too, by the way, with a fun story. But that's Elisha at the bottom. But you're right. This is a bit of an anachronism. But again, the reason they have the white beard isn't so much to be historically accurate. It's to show them as having authority or having dignity. Because Elisha almost certainly is younger than this. Also, if you're interested, there is a oratorio by Mendelssohn called Elijah. This is one of the great oratorios of all time. A lot of you might know Handel's Messiah. The three great oratorios, you should know Handel's Messiah, Haydn's Creation, and then Mendelssohn's Elijah. This is a major, major work. And I mean, we did it here at the Civic Symphony in like 2015. We did the whole thing. And it's in English, okay? He wrote it for England. He was invited by the Birmingham Choral Festival to write this. So it's in King James English. You can understand what they're singing. The recording on the left is the most dramatic. The recording on the right is the most traditional. But this one with Bryn Terfel, he's actually dressed up as Elijah here. You can see that, right? It's brilliant. One of the most, Mendelssohn was a Lutheran convert from Judaism. And so it's a really unique thing in here. And next week, we're actually going to listen to an excerpt from this because he actually musically depicts the showdown with the prophets of Baal. And it's humorous. When they're saying hear and answer, he depicts that musically. And as they get more and more agitated trying to get Baal's attention, he depicts that musically. And then Elijah responds with his prayer. And the prayer is one of the most beautiful arias ever written for a baritone. So, I mean, it's a pretty unique thing. In fact, when he wrote the piece, he was reading 1 Kings 17 and then 1 Kings 18 with the prophets of Baal. And his friend visited him. This is Mendelssohn. So this is in the 1800s. Think 1830s, 1840s. He's reading this with just dramatic voice. And his friend's just like, and he's reading this out loud. And his friend's like, what is he doing? And then he says, he looks up at his friend. He's like, do you see how dramatic this is? Wouldn't this be splendid for an oratorio? Just reading the story of Elijah. He has another oratorio, by the way, on the life of Paul. It's called St. Paul, which is sometimes done. But Elijah's major, major, major work. A lot of amateur choral societies do this. It's another reason we did this here. Go ahead.
I was listening to the Boise long-hair music station.
Boise Public Radio, yeah.
They made it, I think I'm getting the right one. And oratorio was oftentimes used because they couldn't quite fit it into whatever the big thing is.
Right. It's not an opera, but it's not a church service.
Yeah.
So where do you put it?
Accepted as both, I guess.
Right. So what they would do is they would say, well, it's going to be dramatic like an opera, but we're not going to act it out on the stage like an opera because it's a sacred subject. And so we don't want to make it seem like it's too secular. But it's not really church music. So what do we do with this? So an oratorio is dramatic like an opera, but on a biblical theme is generally what it is.
It's confusing to hear this because it sounded like opera to me.
Right, it does. Right. So oratorio. So if you know Handel's Messiah and Haydn's Creation, this is, and Handel has several. We actually did that earlier in this class. We looked at Handel's Saul and Handel's Solomon, which are also brilliant works. But Elijah, if you like more romantic style music, it's not Baroque, it's a little later. This is it. This is one of those big pieces by a converted Jew. He actually would sing in church choirs because that's what you did back then. And he got made fun of. It's like, hey, the Jewish boy's singing about Jesus. And he'd go home and, he didn't know what to do about it. And so his dad's like, all right, let's start looking at this. And the whole family converted to Christianity. Actually, it's pretty interesting. And so he's a Jewish believer, Felix Mendelssohn. All right. So if you wanted a map, this is where, again, to see a little bit of what's going on. Again, Elijah spends most of his ministry up here in the north. It's in green on your map here. You can see Gilgal with a question mark and Bethel. There's Jezreel. He spends time up there. The showdown with the prophets of Baal is at Mount Carmel. The traditional place of Mount Carmel is way up here. He's going to actually go during the drought all the way up here to Zarephath. That's way up in the north. It's not in Israel. And so he's going to minister to a Gentile widow and her son during this. So you can see where he is in the map, but he's way up in the north. This is mostly in the northern kingdom, not in the southern kingdom. However, when he retreats and flees from Jezebel, he flees to Mount Sinai where Moses received the law. And so that's obviously not by accident that he ends up on Horeb or Sinai, the mountain of God. So just to give you that visual again of where he's doing most of his ministry.
So was Ahab's capital, was it Samaria or was it Jezreel?
It's Samaria, but he spends a lot of time there. It's like he's got like his own like outpost. A lot of people would do that in the ancient Near East. Actually, in the Western world, for example, even though Rome was the capital, a lot of the emperors spent time in Milan. So they have like, they'd hold court, right? They'd hold court in different places. Yeah, but Samaria is going to be the traditional capital. But yes, he spends a lot of time there. You could speculate that's because it's closer to Jezebel's home, which is up here, right? Jezebel's from the coast. She's probably Phoenician, as far as things go. All right. So before we get to Elijah, let's talk about these idols of the Canaanites. This is going to help give us some context on what he's dealing with. So those are actual archaeological representations that we know of from the land of Canaan. These are the idols that they would worship. On the left is an Asherah or an Ashtaroth. Now there's some debate on who this actually is. Is it just a cultic object with exaggerated feminine characteristics? There was also poles that are called Asherah poles that are mentioned that are on the high places. So is it an object or a person or both? There's some debate, some scholarly debate on who this is. If it's related to Astarte or Ishtar, we know a lot. If it's something unique to the Canaan, then we don't know a whole lot. So it's kind of, we know some things, but there's some scholarly debate. The middle one here is Baal. Okay, this is Baal. And then on the right, this is also an iron version of Baal. So that's an actual metal object. So these two on the right here are Baal. This one on the left is an Asherah or a cultic, a feminine cultic object, just to see the visual household gods that a lot of the Canaanites were actually worshiping, these actual images. And that was plaguing and in some cases corrupting the people of Israel, where they were worshiping these sort of objects rather than the true God or the gods that were represented in these objects. Okay, so Baal, to give you some background, is the storm god. He's sort of a Zeus figure. He's also, there's a Babylonian god named Enlil. He's kind of like Enlil also. He's the god of agriculture and fertility, and really the harvest kind of vegetative cycles. Okay, then we have Ashtaroth or Astarte, associated with the planet Venus. This is fertility, sensuality, and motherhood. And then she's also the consort of Baal, not necessarily a wife, but certainly one of his partners, if we want to use a politically correct term. Okay. And then Asherah is the cult object, which could be another name for Ashtaroth, or it could be its own, another consort of Baal. Again, with paganism, and it's the same thing with Greek myths. Sometimes there's multiple versions of the same story, so it gets a little confusing. So some of the practices here, we had ritual sacrifices, sometimes animals, unfortunately, sometimes human beings. Cuttings and flagellations, we'll see that in the showdown with the prophets of Baal. They would slit their own arms and cut themselves, and they'd bleed out to try to get Baal's attention, to show how much they needed his help, to try to please him with their devotion. So ritual cuttings and flagellations were common. They were performance related cults or practices to induce the gods to do behavior. So here's the idea. My son can handle this because he's already had some conversations with me, so I can say this, but it'll be in the recording. So I'll be as blunt as I can without being as lurid as I can. They believed that the more things you did that imitated the gods would do more of that thing. So the idea is if you have a lot of ritual intercourse, then the gods will have a lot of ritual intercourse, and therefore it will rain more. So they had cult, yeah. So in other words, that's why they had cult prostitutes, for example, in the temples, both male and female, and they would engage in these ritualistic sex practices to try to say, hey, gods, we're going to do these things just like you do this. And so if we do enough of this stuff, then they're going to do these things too. And the more of this stuff we have, the more rain we'll have, or the more the vegetative cycle will continue, or the more, do you see what's going on here? And so this is why the Israelites would defile themselves on the high places. That's why the Old Testament talks this way. It's pretty atrocious. Okay. And so they would give themselves over to these, and they're full-time employees that would engage in these sort of practices. The closest parallel we have to this is in Babylon, which with the cult of Ishtar. If you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, you might recognize this, one of the great epics, and it is a great epic, very philosophical. Okay, if you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, but there's this weird account at the beginning where a priestess of Ishtar basically seduces a wild man. It's not a surprise that it's a priestess of Ishtar. Okay, and so that's what's going on. And so they're surrounded by this. This is what Elijah's confronting. This is the whole point. I'm not telling you this because it's interesting world history, even though it kind of is. I'm telling you this because this is what Elijah's confronting. He's showing up on the scene. Remember his name? My God is Yahweh. He's showing up. My God is Yahweh. And the people of Israel are surrounded by or even engaging in these practices or worshiping those objects that we saw. Okay. Some other, again, parallels. I'm going to try to minimize this. Sorry. It's kind of off the screen, but it says Mesopotamia, Egypt, Hittites, and Phoenicians. So if you look at Mesopotamia, Babylon, Sumeria, or if you look at Egypt and their gods, or if you look at the Hittites or the Phoenicians, which is where Jezebel's from, because Jezebel's the one that's importing these priests. Okay. Because this is where she's from. So if you look at all these surrounding cultures, we can get a pretty good, solid guess on what's going on, what Elijah's addressing here. But it helps you to understand why he's so vociferous and why he's so firm when he deals with these folks, and why this is so foreign. It's worth noting, if you read certain skeptical accounts of the Old Testament or modern biblical studies, like say if you go to Yale or North Carolina, University of North Carolina, and study the Bible, they'll say something like, well, this shows that Yahwehism wasn't dominant yet, that monotheism, even though there was some monotheism around, that the Israelites had multiple gods and Yahweh was just one of many competing gods. That's what you'll actually hear. If you go to a modern school, that's not a Christian school, not like Concordia, okay? If you go to Yale, or if you go to North Carolina, Chapel Hill, or someplace like that, they'll say, well, this is just Yahwehism competing with Baalism, and Yahweh and Baal were kind of competing storm gods, and that's what you're going to hear. Now, they actually admit, what's funny about this is when I hear that, my response is, you're right, there was a competition because the people of Israel were defiling themselves. You're absolutely correct. I agree that the people of Israel were worshiping other gods, but that doesn't disprove the Bible. All it proves, and actually, if anything, it confirms what the Bible says, that Israel, throughout its history, continually has a problem with idolatry. So what you're showing me, all this evidence you're showing me, actually confirms what the scriptures say, that the people of Israel were struggling, and that there was a faithful remnant, and that this idolatrous practices were one of the reasons they go into exile in the first place. And so, yeah, I agree. But just so you know, if you read certain texts, you'll find that this sort of stuff will be included, and that Yahwehism is just one competing religion. So they try to kind of explain it away. Is how this goes. And it's not until much, much later, until after the exile, that they're really truly monotheistic. And my argument for that is like, no, they're monotheistic in the first place. They were supposed to be. They just corrupted themselves. And that's why you're seeing all this evidence. So just know that that's out there. All right, so now we get to the biblical text itself. I want to get through 1 Kings 17. You have an outline, and I'll address this for you, but I also have the text projected for you on the screen, because Elijah just kind of shows up. It's not like we get his lineage. We don't get his genealogy. The commentary I read says the Spirit goes where he wills, right? And this is an example of that. Now, Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. And the word of the Lord came to him, depart from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. And he went and lived by the brook of Cherith, that is east of the Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. And after a while the brook dried up, because there was no rain in the land. Okay, so this passage right here is sometimes called the call of Elijah. Now, this is a big deal. So first off, by not having rain, there's already a direct challenge to Baal. Because Baal is the storm god and the fertility and vegetative cycle. So if everything's in drought, that means Baal is failing or his priests and the people are failing. So this is a direct challenge. This is like in Egypt, right? Where God judges the gods of Egypt. And so he has direct challenges in those 10 plagues. This is the same thing. There's no rain. So now Baal, their storm god, their supreme being, the one who's giving them life, their fertility god, he's abandoning them, or something's happening here because he's not responding. And so they've got a problem. They should recognize this spiritually, that something has gone wrong. Okay. And so another thing about this, dew, the idea not just no rain, but no dew is also a big deal, because even if they would have already gone through the rain cycle, dew is how a lot of the crops would be watered during the summer months, because it's kind of like Pocatello. It's very dry, but at night the humidity increases. And so the dew point there is actually pretty high. So dew is very common, especially in the higher elevations. So Israel and the hills of Israel, where you have olives and grapes and those sort of crops, especially those sort of plants would be watered by the dew. So for him to specifically say there's no dew either, that's a big deal, because that means the existing crops also are going to fail in addition to that. So again, remember how I said that Elijah is a new Moses? He goes to the desert and receives provision. He receives bread from heaven. Only the ravens are delivering it in this case. God's creation is delivering it. But do you see how he's going out into the desert and receiving God's provision? See the Moses connection? This is one of many Moses connections that we're going to get with Elijah here, okay? And so the way it says it in the Lutheran Study Bible is it says, and you have an asterisk. So if you have the Lutheran Study Bible, you can see the study note there. It's in the asterisk on your outline. It says, having predicted a drought to Ahab, the great prophet Elijah goes to the brook Cherith, where the Lord has ravens miraculously provide for him. In a harsh, wicked, and hostile world, God watches over those who are his. No matter how much everything may seem to be against us, the Lord is with us, a haven of everlasting love. Or if you read the Small Catechism, read about what Luther says in the Lord's Prayer about our daily bread, right? Providing for our needs. It's not just food, providing for our daily needs. We see that in the process here with Elijah. It's pretty cool to kind of see how this works. And of course, we have the iconography involving this. This is Tishbe, by the way. This is where he's from, kind of a rough land, as you can see. Elijah's a rough prophet. He's kind of a manly man in some ways. He is not a weak prophet. He's not a weeping prophet. He's a direct confrontational guy. And so, you know how some people say that your geography helps determine your personality a little bit? And so if you live in a place where you have to sustain yourself, or if you have to be somebody who's, living off the land in a rough place, that kind of represents him. So that's the traditional location and what it looks like and where he's from. You can see a road and there's a settlement. It's no longer there, but you can see the ruins there on the top of the hill. And this is traditionally the brook there. So this is in the cave, the brook of Cherith, in between the kind of the little locations. That's why the iconography had those cliff sides. Did you see that? And as we're pretty confident, you can see the water, the stream running there, running over the rocks. So it's pretty clean water. And this is where he would have been drinking. But it's also a bit of a wadi. And a wadi is where you have runoff from the rains and runoff from the mountains. But once they dry up, they dry up. And that's what we see in the account. So here, this was taken after some of the spring rains. And you could see where he would have been looking at. So imagine kind of sitting on a rock, drinking out of the brooks, and then ravens coming into there, bringing you food. That gives you a good visualization of what's happening at the beginning of his ministry. This is another example, by the way, because I said there's lots of art. This is by Giovanni Girolamo Savoldo, right? And you can see him right there. By the way, his chariot is still in the background. They can't resist putting that chariot up there somewhere, right? There it is, way, way back there. It's like he's on the way out already. And there's a raven again bringing him bread as he sits in a cave there. And the Jordan River's out in the background here. So again, lots of artwork on this. It continues after the brook dries up. Then the word of the Lord came to him, arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon. So again, that's a Phoenician city. This is not Israel. And dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I am gathering a couple of sticks, that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. So she's basically gathering her last meal, or at least that's what she thinks, because I have nothing else left. She's gathering our last meal. So this means that the famine is not just impacting Israel, it's also impacting the surrounding territories. God is not just the God of Israel. This is important because remember, in the ancient Near East, people thought gods were also regional. So there was a god of certain cities. So in Mesopotamia, Marduk was the god of Babylon, where Enlil was the god of Uruk. And now they all worshiped them all as gods, but each city kind of had its own regional god and temple. Ur, where Abraham was from, had its own god, a moon goddess, right? So you can go through all these different places. And so for the idea that Baal is being challenged by Yahweh, not only is it affecting northern Israel, it's affecting everywhere. That's also a direct challenge, saying this is not just regionalism. God is not just the God of Israel. He's the God of all things. So it's important to realize that that's happening there also. So she's gathering the last meal, and she also seems to be a God-fearer. She knows that Elijah is a prophet. Notice what she says, right? She says, as the Lord your God lives. In other words, this is a reality. What I'm going to tell you right now, I'm gathering my last meal right now. I'm telling you the truth. It's kind of like swearing, not quite, but it's almost like swearing. As God lives today, I am telling you, this is all I have. That's what she's saying to Elijah. So she seems to be a proselyte, a righteous Gentile. She is a substitute, if you want to go to the whole text here, because she's from the same region that Jezebel is from. She is who Jezebel should be. See what I mean? She's a replacement. This poor widow is treating the prophet of God the way he's supposed to be treated, even though she's a foreigner, unlike Jezebel. So she serves as a direct contrast in her humility and her acknowledgement of God's prophet. Okay, so that's how this sets up. All right, it continues. And Elijah said to her, do not fear. Go and do as you have said. But first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me. And afterward make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rains upon the earth. And she went and did as Elijah said. And she and he, that's Elijah, and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. So again, God always fulfilled his promises. And so again, on your outline there, it says 17:9, the heartland of Baal worship in Sidon might have been thought by many to be a region over which Israel's God could have no authority. Yet one discovers as the story unfolds that it is nevertheless an area also badly affected by the drought mentioned in verse 1. The Lord is God of all lands and can bring drought to all lands. He can even command a widow of this northern region to feed Elijah, although the widow herself shows no awareness of being directly commanded by God. It may be understood that it's more of an indirect way that God has ordained this. And so because she's a God-fearer and she respects God's prophet, she fulfills God's will, even if she doesn't necessarily have a clear command from God. She's still fulfilling God's will, which is pretty neat. And so then again, the Lutheran Study Bible is helpful here. It says, through Elijah, the Lord miraculously provides food for a widow in Zarephath. This story illustrates God's never-ending goodness. He daily and richly provides for all our needs. That's catechism language right there. There it is. Hear it? Those of you who are raised in the Lutheran tradition should recognize that, okay? Blessing us far beyond what we deserve or what we ask. And again, he is not just the God of Israel. When somebody, that's how, when Jesus alludes to this account, right? Jesus, that's that passage in Luke, by the way, I think it was Luke 4, right? In the widow of Zarephath. Jesus does this on purpose, saying, basically, he's pointing out to the Pharisees and religious leaders, look, the prophets that you have, these people that you admire, like Elijah and Moses, they're ministering to Gentiles all the time. It's just you've forgotten about it, right? Or you're choosing to ignore it, maybe more maliciously. But Jesus uses this story of how Elijah ministers to this widow in the Gospels. It continues, after this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, what have you against me, O man of God? Notice she still knows who he is. She does not accuse him and say that God doesn't exist. She doesn't start appealing to pagan gods. She directly addresses Elijah as the prophet of God. Okay. Now you could be cynical and say, is she actually, if she calls him the man of God, is she also accusing God of this too? Maybe it's, it's hard to know. Maybe it's again, it's an implication more than it is clear. Anyways, you have come to me to bring my son to remembrance and to cause the death of my son. And he said, it's a grieving mom. It's a grieving mom. Remember this. And he said to her, give me your son. And he took him from her arms and carried him up into the upper chamber where he lodged and laid him on his own bed. And he cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son? Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again. And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, see, your son lives. And the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth is truth. God does this for her sake, right? He does it not for Elijah's sake. He does it for her sake. Okay. He provides this in his mercy. This is some artwork, by the way, Elijah raising the widow's son. This is him advocating for the son on his own bed here. Again, probably looking a little older than he was, but again, it's that depiction. This is by an American English artist, Benjamin West, 1774, Elijah pleading before God for this son. Now, they're probably dressed a little bit more accurately, though, if you notice that, right, in the 1700s to kind of see that, which is fascinating. By the way, on your outline here, again, just to kind of highlight this, so we only got like 4 or 5 minutes left. A few things on the backside. It says he stretched himself upon the child 3 times. The purpose of this action is not made clear. Biblical prophets are often found acting out as well as speaking. Ezekiel does some weird stuff, for example, like measuring things for seemingly no reason because it's a vision. Or, Hosea marrying a woman of ill repute. It's like performative prophecy. And so we're not sure exactly why Elijah does this unless you can make some maybe tenuous resurrection connections. 3 times, right? Something to think about as he's acting this out. It's interesting, okay? Elijah's actions here appear to be part of his prayer that the child's life should be coming into him again. This is the final illustration that the Lord is the only true God because it demonstrates that when faced with the God of death, the Lord, unlike Baal, does not need to submit to him. He can cross the border from Israel to Sidon to bring life out of death. The Lord cannot be barred even from a place such as the underworld. Think about the God. So here's this widow who's a God-fearer. She probably doesn't have, what we would call catechism, rabbinical training. She just knows vaguely who God is, but she's surrounded by pagans. She knows there's a drought. She knows that Elijah speaks on Yahweh's behalf, but she's probably a little unclear on some stuff. And now she's like, wow, you're God. Not only is he a God that can control and defeat my gods or the gods that are around me, this God can actually go to the grave and come back. This is a different type of God that you worship, Elijah. Pretty amazing connection there. And so I want to give you this quote. This is from Peter Leithart in his First Kings commentary. I think this is a great gospel message at the end. Listen to what he says. Through his prophet, Yahweh demonstrates his lordship, his boundary-bursting power. That's a great poetic way. Leithart is a literature professor also, in addition to be a theologian, and he writes that way. So if you want poetic yet theologically correct writing, he's awesome for that. He comes out of the Reformed tradition, but he's super sacramental. Because I'm surprised he's not Lutheran yet, is when I read him, okay? He shows his power over the wilderness, over enemy territory, and over the grave. And in this, he manifests his relentless persistence. That should sound familiar to you. Pastor Dinger loves to talk about that, right? Relentless persistence. His unwavering commitment to preserve his prophet and to save Israel. Elijah goes to the wilderness, and Yahweh follows him. Elijah goes to Zarephath, and Yahweh follows him. The widow's son goes to the grave, and Yahweh follows to bring life from death. In the face of Yahweh's persistent loyalty, if Israel fails to respond with trust and love, it is because of its own hard-heartedness, for Israel is left without excuse. This is the God of Jesus Christ, the God who comes to us in Christ Jesus. Will our God enter the wilderness for us? He has done in Jesus. Will he cross into the territory of the prince of this world for us? He has done in Jesus. Will he cross the boundary between the living and the dead for us? He has done in Jesus. Here's your gospel application from this passage. from Lythar. I think that's a brilliant way of summing this up. That in Elijah, we have this prophet par excellence, but it really points to the ultimate one who goes through not just a temporary situation, but the ultimate situation, the eternal situation, and defeats sin, death, and the devil. And so on your outline, I have one last quote for you, because this is just to show you how unique this is. I love these contextual things as well. This is what I like to show people. So remember when I told you earlier that some, skeptics will say, oh, it was just Yahwehism was just competing. Elijah is not like other prophets. Look what this says. A study of the prophetic texts available from the ancient world has shown that these sponsored prophets rarely had anything negative to say about the king or his policies. Only a couple of examples are extant where these prophets proclaim any indictment or judgment on the king. That's because the king's paying them. Okay, and so the king's paying him, and if you say nasty things about the king, you could lose your life. Okay, and yet what's Elijah doing? He's immediately challenging the king. So already there's something different about Elijah. Okay, they more often provide instruction to the king, often regarding cultic actions to be taken, and almost always give support and encouragement to the king in his undertakings. In contrast, we find Elijah offering no support at all of the king's policies. Instead, he has stinging indictments and horrific judgments that he pronounces on the royal house. Elijah is not like other prophets in the surrounding cultures. See this? Okay. Such an adversarial role is unattested in the ancient Near East. Though that does not mean such a role did not exist, it must be remembered that most of the literature we have from the ancient world was preserved by the palace and the temple. These sources would be less likely to preserve the antagonistic words of any who stood against the throne. But here's the big part. Finally, a message like Elijah's could only make sense in an Israelite context because his message concerned loyalty to a particular god. In the ancient Near East, there were particular gods who wanted more attention from the king, but it was uncommon for the worship of any particular god to be repressed, as Ahab and Jezebel sought to kill the prophets of Yahweh, or for one god to be exalted to the exclusion of others, as Elijah became the champion for Yahweh's kingship. And you can read the last for yourself. Do you see the point that it's making? Elijah is unique. This isn't just, oh, these are just competing prophets and competing gods. No, the exclusivity of Yahweh, the idea that there's only one God who rules all things, not just a region, not just a certain domain, not just the vegetative cycle or the underworld or love or fertility or anything else. Think of the Greek gods if you want, if that's easier for you. This is a God who rules all things. The God who started the entire universe. It's an indictment on all of paganism here, and Elijah represents this. So this is utterly and totally unique in terms of the history of the world, and you can see that in that quote there. That's why I printed that for you, just so you could see how awesome Elijah is in this ministry and how unique God truly is. And so in the context of world history and Western Civ, this is what I tell my students. I'm going to end on this. You go to the Greeks, you see Zeus, Aphrodite, Hades, right? You go to the Canaanites, you see Baal. You go to Egypt, you see all these different figures like Osiris and Anubis and Horus, right? You go to Babylon and you run into Marduk and Enlil and all these things. And then all of a sudden, now in the middle of nowhere, seemingly, I'm saying seemingly, there is one God who made heaven and earth, and he rules all things. There is nothing like that in it changes the world. It truly changes the world. And so you have this unique perspective. You cannot explain this away. This is why so many of the critics are trying to do that, is because it is so unique. And so they have to try to make it seem not unique. See what I mean? Oh, it's just as mankind evolves, they come up with new ideas like monotheism. It's like this history of religions. And it's, as philosophy evolves and they start asking questions, they kind of come up with this kind of super God. And then the super God becomes an ultimate God. And then he becomes a maximally great. Do you see what they're doing to try to make it not unique? That's not the case. This is unique because the more you look at the evidence of this, the more you realize how unique Israel actually is. And by the way, that's actually what the word holy means, is God is set apart and utterly unique. God is holy, he is one, and there is only one God. And it's him who we serve. And again, he has done all these things in Jesus as we end here. Let's close in prayer. Or actually, let's just close in the blessing because I got to get over there. Okay. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up his countenance upon us and give us peace. Amen.